people want to do the right thing for the most part. And so it's very easy then to get caught up in the justice movement, especially when it then labels Israel badly. One of the things that we see from a claim perspective is, oh, we love the Jews, but we don't love the Zionists. Now, on the front of it, it might not be expressly an anti-Israel claim, but bear with me a few moments and I'll show you that it actually is. Last year, this was a poster that was publicized across the nation, but in particular in New York, for a day of action, people coming together. For those of you that may not be familiar with the term Juneteenth, which you see there in the middle, that's a day in June where primarily African Americans celebrate the ending of slavery. And so here's this rally about how we're coming together, we're in justice, and we're standing together with our African American community as they continue to fight for racial equality. And if you read with me, the heading says, New York City Day of Action, hosted by Muslims for Abolition. No problem, all great. The fine print underneath that heading, open to all minus cops and Zionists. So in Olga, as Black as she is, as female as she is, because she's a Zionist, would not have been welcome. Never mind the fact that she's not even a Jew, I'm a Christian, but because I'm a Zionist, I would not have been welcomed. Here is a headline, July 2020. In Canada, a restaurant owner lost her business deals after she said that Zionists are not welcome. Oh, but she says, I love Jewish people. And so my posting that Zionists are Nazis, it's not anti-Semitic, but it's a valid criticism of Zionists' racist, supremacist foundations. And if you can see on her window there, she has a note, I don't want to say graffiti, but she's got like she's got the Palestinian flag and she's got a note saying, I love Gaza, which she perfectly can have there. But what is the intention behind this apparent separation of Jews from Zionists? Is there anything different from being a Jew and a Zionist? And the answer, ladies and gents, especially as we see the rise in anti-Semitism, not only on the streets of our nations, one only has to look, unfortunately, on a very regular basis at what's happening in New York, but also on our university campuses. We have seen a rise in anti-Semitism by people who say, no, we love the Jews, but we don't like the Zionists. But who do they target? They target the Jews. I'm not sure how many of us heard of a young lady, and she's just but one example of several, who had to resign from her position because of the abuse that she was faced. A young Jewish lady. Why? Because of her position on Israel. She dared believe that Israel had a right to exist, that Jewish people had a right to claim sovereignty in a place that they called home in their ancestral land. Don't worry about the Japanese, don't worry about the Chinese, don't worry about the French. It's only those Jewish people. So when we see people say that we love the Jews, but we don't love the Zionists, what they're actually saying is that we don't believe in Israel's right to exist. We don't believe in the fact that Jews can have a place that they call home. And so, yes, I put to you that that whole notion is not only anti-Zionist, anti-Israel, it is anti-Semitic. A second prime notion, a second prime claim that people often make, Israel is a colonialist empire. If you ask, especially young people, exactly what does this mean? You'll find that half of them don't even know. It's these buzzwords that have become so prevalent and they invoke emotion, because who wants to live in a world where there's still colonialism, especially when there has been a lot of work that's been done towards the end of the 20th century with various countries gaining their independence. I come from a continent, the continent of Africa, where all but one country was colonized. And so when people talk about, oh my gosh, there's another colonialist regime that's existing in the world, yes, we've got to do something about it. But then the question that I posed to us tonight is, where does environmental rights come into the picture if we are then going to talk about colonialism and specifically Israel? This is an example of an issue that one of our teens brought to our attention. There was a fundraising activity that took place, and a wonderful initiative at that. We need to do better for the environment, these teens decided. And so they came together and there was an initiative to fundraise, if I'm not mistaken, for 5 different environmental organizations. And so fundraise they did, and they raised quite a bit of money. But then it turned out, one young person found out when she looked at Black Earth Farms, that yes, they did say that we're about the environment, but they were about more. I've taken some snapshots of their principles of organization statement, said differently, their manifesto. Part of it reads, we need autonomous and sovereign communities that steward and produce their own ethically harvested food without pesticides and other chemical inputs. We need active divestment from the colonial food system and the fossil fuel petrochemical industry. Sounds good to me so far. We need access to deprivatized clean water and food landscapes with no tolerance for racialized and gendered domination or enslavement. We need justice and reparations for Black and Indigenous people globally. Fair. But then it continues. All forms of colonial and imperial governments are illegitimate entities that were created by genocidal, slave-holding colonists, okay? This includes the bloodthirsty settler state of Israel, which needs to be immediately dismantled to ensure the right of return for all Palestinians globally. These colonial governments massacred indigenous people, stole their land, and then destroyed and continue to destroy ecosystems to grow cash crops like sugar, tobacco, and cotton on plantations for export and wealth building in the globalizing capitalist market. The wealth created on these plantations remains solely in the hands of land-grabbing capitalists with no regard for earth, truth, or justice. The theft of indigenous lands and genocide of indigenous peoples is ongoing. After all of that, can I please take you back to the second sentence on the screen? This includes the bloodthirsty settler state of Israel. Wait, what? How did we go from ensuring that the environment is made accessible to all, is taken care of, and now we're talking about colonialism and imperial governments and Israel? When we engage with the teens here at Club Z, we say to them, not only is it important that you yourselves, but also as you communicate with your friends and people in your school, that you don't just cling to these buzzwords, but you challenge them in their meeting and say, all right, let's break it down. What does colonialism mean? What does imperialism mean? And let's then start to have a conversation. 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity of presenting the story of Israel's disengagement from Gaza in 2005 to the Charlotte teens. And as we were conversing, when we introduced Gaza to them, not only looking at its geography, but also looking at the number of people that exist in Gaza, we looked at numbers that existed, I think, in 2016, 2017, and that was about 1.7 million, and looked at the fact that in 2020, that number increased to 2 million. And so I put to the teens a question to say, what do we then say when you look at these numbers provided to us by nonprofit organizations that do numbers for countries all across the world? When we look at these numbers, is this evidence of a genocide, which is something that many people like to say that Israel is guilty of? And one young lady put up her hand and she said, no, that's not a genocide. In fact, I had to challenge one of my friends when she said that Israel is committing this genocide. And I said to her, I said, how did you handle it? She said, well, did what we are being taught here in Club Z, and said, all right, let's look at the definition of genocide. What does genocide mean? The response that was given to her by her friend, she told me, oh, don't come to me with those definitions. Who do you think you are? And immediately when they do that, parents, you recognize and you see that these teens, that people across the world, unfortunately, people on the other side, have just taken these buzzwords and are using them, wielding them as weapons in their attempts to delegitimize Israel. Who cares about the environment actually then when it comes to that point? Because really, if we were going to care about the environment, then let's do things that actually make sense with regards to the environment. I'll talk about let's caring about the Palestinian people a little bit later in the conversation. So we need to be able to not only empower our teens, but ourselves have an appreciation of what does colonialism mean? What does settler mean? And is it perhaps then a question as to indigeneity? And specifically indigeneity of the Jewish people. The question that I pose to you in that regard is, can an indigenous people be colonialists? For all of our refresher, let's go over the definition of colonialism. Colonialism, paraphrased, is when you have one particular nation gaining political control over another nation, and then that follows with that nation that's gained control, bringing across its people. And so they settle in the land, meaning they come and they build homes and they create a society for themselves. But oftentimes that is done, in fact, most of the times that's done in order to exploit that nation that's being oppressed economically. And then you also find that that culture is imposed on those people. The way of life from this colonial power is imposed on the people that it's colonized. So for example, in South Africa, we were colonized twice, by the Dutch and then secondly, by the British. And so the second language in South Africa during apartheid time, in fact, the primary language during apartheid was Afrikaans. It was the language of the oppressor. And that was something that we were encouraged and in fact demanded of to speak in our schools. When we did history, I'm very sad to say that it's only in my adult life that I actually had to go and learn more about African history, because that's not the history that we were taught in school. Colonialism dictated that their way of thinking, that their history, that their what mattered to them is then what was going to matter to the people on the ground. And so the question then needs to be said, all right, is this what is taking place in the Middle East and on the ground? Also asked differently is the question of indigeneity. Indigeneity, ladies and gentlemen, is, as we teach our teens, can be determined as we look at evidence as well as research in relation to 5 particular points. Do the people there have a particular language? Do they have a specific culture? Is there a spirituality or religion that is common amongst them? Are they there together as a people? And is there this land that is their ancestral land? And all of these 4 factors, the language, the culture, the religion, as well as their existence as a people, was it there from the Genesis, from the very beginning? And if we look at the facts, if we look at the history, remember, we're in the quest for saving truth. Ladies and gentlemen, the answer is yes. The Jewish people meet all of these requirements. And so the Jewish people are indigenous to the land. Oh, but Olga, what do you say to the person that says, but the Palestinian people were also there? It's in 1948 during the war that they then left because the Jews kicked them out. The Israelis kicked them out in the fight for independence. But they were there. So they too are indigenous. Well, yes, I agree with you that unfortunately, lots of Arabs had to leave. In fact, I say Arabs deliberately because the term Palestinian only came later in the 1960s. Again, lesson for another day, but that's something that your teens are taught. So yes, they were there, but were they indigenous to the land? The answer, if you look at history, is no. Go all the way back in time, and you will find that it is the Jewish people that are indigenous to the land. Jews are from Judea. Even the earth bears witness to this fact. One of the things that I say to my young people when I was in South Africa, as well as to these teens here, is that we look at history. We look at various resources, but then if people want to question us further, we look at the ground. Look at the archaeological findings that we found. When you have pieces of roads and walls, as well as inscriptions on coins that are sketched out, whether it's in Latin, showing what happened during the Roman Empire when they conquered the land, or Hebrew itself, because way before the Romans conquered the land, we had the kingdom of Israel that existed. And so the earth speaks, the earth testifies to this people that used to live there way before. And so, yes, and today we see that there's a growing number and that there has been a number of people going back home, of Jews going back home, which is what they're doing. They're going back home. People may then say, okay, but they're settling in the land, Olga. The important thing in relation to that word settler is, what is the intention behind it? If the intention was purely as it is per the English dictionary of we're now resting, we're now calling this place a home, we're coming to this land, I would say I have no problem with the word settler, but ladies and gents, that's not how and why they use that term. And so that's why I do have a problem with the word settler. The word settler is used to delegitimize Israel's existence and to further push the narrative that Israel is a colonial state. The Arabs were here first. Israel came in its might and kicked out all the Arabs, and so they are colonialists. That is false. The third claim that we oftentimes hear, and in my opinion, it's not because it impacts the country from where I come, but if you look at the whole existence of the BDS and many of its partners, this whole notion that Israel is an apartheid state, that Israel treats its people as badly, and if not more badly than South Africa did to its Black people. And so allow me to take you on a little bit of a history lesson in relation to my country, South Africa. In fact, before I do that, when we look at the egregious nature of this particular claim, we see how it continues to fuel various, not only accusations against Israel, but it emboldens Israel's armies to continue their quest for the dismantling of Israel. I don't know how many of us saw the Human Rights Watch report that was published a few days ago that accused Israel of an apartheid crimes against Palestinian people. Over 200 pages of accusation after accusation against Israel. And if you were to read that report like I have, it would take a thesis, but it's very possible to tackle each of the claims that are made there. One of the wonderful things that it does, although sadly so, I say wonderful facetiously, is that it manipulates the truth, it distorts the facts, it doesn't give full context to what really happened. And we're actually going to look at a case study as to how, unfortunately, very effectively, people are able to sway others' opinions about Israel because they don't know the nuance and the details around Israel, as well as its existence in the Middle East and what's happening with the Palestinian people, again, which is why I'm grateful to be part of Club Z, because we don't only talk about the cherry tomatoes and Israel being a light to the nations, which is amazing. And again, I come from a continent where Africa has done amazing, where Israel, excuse me, has done amazing things for my continent. One of the reasons why I am so passionate about Israel. But we look at the nuance to say, when they say that, actually, what do they mean? And how then can we better address it? So we look at this report, and over the last couple of days, we've had people who are very known for their hatred towards Israel, like Representatives Omar and Tlaib, rejoicing over this fact that, yay, here's another non-profit. Here's another non-biased organization that is coming to the side, legitimizing the claims that Israel is an apartheid state. But there have been critics that have been calling this report a culmination of decades of obsessive attacks against Israel. Yosef Haddad, if you don't know him, I encourage you to follow him. He's on social media. He's an Israeli Arab, very vocal in what he says. And he put up his hand on Twitter and he said, hey, CNN and AP, I'm an Israeli Arab. Here's the actual definition of apartheid. The HRW actually made up their own definition, which sadly they did. If you read the introduction of this report, they acknowledge the fact that if you just look at the claim, or rather the definition of apartheid as it pertained to South Africa, Israel doesn't really fit in there. And so we need to appreciate that there are other circumstances which also need to be considered in order for us to claim that Israel is apartheid state. But we must do so because that's the right thing to do if we're talking about justice and if we're talking about ensuring that the Palestinian people also have an opportunity at a better life. But you can't just change words because you feel like it. That's called propaganda. That's called disinformation. Nikki Haley, as we know, she was an incredible ambassador to the United Nations. She said, human rights watch is such a joke. They are literally the same organization that opposed the US in our fight to reform the Human Rights Council. One of the things that I've been taught and that I try and teach our teams is that when you look at organizations, particularly in this era, non-governmental organizations, non-profit organizations, look behind the scenes and see who funds them. Are they actually as unbiased as they say that they are, or are they being used as a front? We've got to be real. Are they being used as a front to actually push an agenda? Because oftentimes when people see that there's this non-profit, this non-government organization, this organization that doesn't have any ties supposedly with a particular government, then you would hope that you can believe them because they're supposed to be telling you the truth, gathering information from everywhere and presenting it as fact, just as it is. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. And so we need to do our research and our homework to see what has this organization done before? What have they supported? What have they not supported? Are they consistent in who they call out in the name of human rights, in the name of justice? Nikki Haley gives us an example to say, these guys, please, they have been fighting our efforts to reform the Human Rights Council, which, as we know, with the utmost respect to the United Nations, is an absolute joke if you look at who sits on there. Countries that are countries that perpetuate some of the most egregious crimes against their people not only have seats on the Human Rights Council, but also lead. And again, this is not things that Olga said.
Do you have it handy there?
So what is apartheid defined? It literally means to be apart. Ladies and gentlemen, apartheid is not racism. Just because there is a policy that a particular business or an industry might have that doesn't seem to treat people fairly, that's not apartheid. There's racism in America, absolutely, but we don't say that America is an apartheid state. Is there racism in the United Kingdom? Yes, there is, but we don't say that it's an apartheid state. Is there racism in Israel? Yes, there is. There's racism in every single country, and I personally believe that there will always be racism for as long as there are people, because some people just aren't nice. But does that mean that it's apartheid? No, it doesn't. Apartheid was a government that reigned in South Africa from 1948 all the way through to 1994 that segregated and discriminated non-whites from white South Africans, ladies and gents, purely for the fact that we were of a different skin tone. And this segregation happened by way of a very cleverly designed, intricate, over 150 codified laws, intricately designed and woven, that controlled the living of Black people and white people in all their ways. Where we ate, how we went to the doctor, how we received medical assistance. Black people, we could not vote in our very own country. My father sits in the National Parliament in South Africa. As a Black person, he could not sit in a place of authority or represent his people. Wasn't allowed. We couldn't even have a say. And we were citizens of our very own country. It was based on race morality. In other words, when God created white people and Black people, so they thought, well, the white people, he took his time. He did a good job. All done. When he looked at the Black people, he was in a bit of a hurry. So he couldn't really quite finish the job and do a good job, right? So we were inferior, both in terms of moral issues, as well as in terms of our understanding and our ability to aspire, become doctors and aspire to become scientists and engineers. We couldn't do that. We didn't have the capacity to do that. We were inferior. That word Bantu was referenced to us as Black people. Literally, we were separated, like you would have seen in the Jim Crow South, except in South Africa, it was the rule of the entire nation, and it was law. It was constitutional to separate people, just purely based on the color of their skin. This is one of my favorite pictures, and I say favorite pictures not because I love it, but because it showed how Black people were treated. We were also called natives. Caution, beware of the natives. That's kind of like a sign that you would see at a zoo. Beware the lion, beware the tiger, dangerous. Oh no, beware the natives. You can't come and live there. Very quickly, an example. This is apartheid South Africa. This is not what is happening in Israel. In apartheid South Africa, Black people could not come together with white people, but you could actually apply for permission to do so. And what I'm showing you now on the screen is a permit for Black people to actually attend a wedding of white people. And it says here, the colors mentioned. Now, I'm not going to go in terms of the terminology again, just because this session is not the time for it, but the term colored here is a very different term to what people in the US would call colored. It's interestingly, it's another race. As Black as I am in South Africa, I'm not considered colored. So it says the coloreds mentioned may as the only coloreds attend the wedding reception, all right? So coloreds were another category of Black people in South Africa. So it said that only these coloreds can attend the wedding. And interestingly enough, the coloreds who are allowed to attend this, on the back were a couple of names, but you know what? They're not allowed to dance as part of the wedding. So you have a permit. You can come, but you can't participate, and only you are allowed to. I spoke earlier about how in their thinking, when God created Black people, he didn't really quite do a good job. And so not only were we morally inferior, we were also like intellectually inferior. These are the words of the architect of the educational system in South Africa during apartheid. We had Bantu Education. He said there is no place for the African and the European community above the level of certain forms of labor. It is of no avail to him to receive a training which has as its aim absorption in the European community. So ladies and gentlemen, what did that translate into? Black people during apartheid South Africa received subpar education, deliberately so. So not only did we not go to the same schools, we went to segregated schools, but we received a subpar education. Why? Because we only had the capacity to be laborers, to be servants, to be workers. That was apartheid South Africa. That is not what's happening in Israel. In Israel, you have people of all colors, people of various ethnicities, going and receiving treatment in the same hospitals and receiving treatment, or rather being able to study at universities. Omar, the co-founder of BDS, he's got a degree from Tel Aviv University. That's Israel. Some of the laws that governed South Africa, past laws which restricted the movement of where we could go if we did not have a document. Again, I wish I could, maybe perhaps, Marsha, we should actually do a detailed discussion on apartheid South Africa because of how it's been weaponized and misused. But these past laws weren't put in place in order for security purposes. No, it was just the question of, oh, Olga, I see your hair's a little bit curlier. True story. I see your hair's curlier. Let's make sure that we do a test. There was a test, ladies and gentlemen, that was done. It was called the pencil test. You put a pencil in a black person's hair or in any person's hair. And if they shook their head and the pencil fell out, you were white. And if the pencil stayed like mine is, you were black. That's how frivolous it was. And so we had these passes that determined where we could move. Because remember, we had been moved to different parts of the country again, because white people had to get the better land. So it didn't matter if it was our land. All right, we were just moved to places where it was going to be easy for them to get access to cheap labor. What I'm talking about with regards to where we lived was determined in terms of the Group Areas Act, legislation that was put in place saying because of the color of your skin, you live here, you live here, you live here. But they went even further during apartheid South Africa, and they said, okay, not only is it not good enough for us to separate white people and black people based on the color of their skin, but also on their ethnicities. I'm going to touch on this because it's something that has started to gain momentum in the mainstream, this whole notion of Bantustans. Bantustans in South Africa, ladies and gents, again, for the purposes of time, I'm starting to go a little bit faster, is they did not only separate black people based on the color of their skin, they separated us based on our tribes. So here you have South Africa, and using this key, depending on where you, or rather what tribe you came from, they then would move you to these areas. So I am a Motswana, I'm Tswana, that's my tribe. And so what they then did with us is my family home was around here. When I say my family home, my ancestors, my dad's parents, my mom came from more north. But because we were Tswana, because of my dad, they then wanted us to move to the areas that are designated here in what this pink orangey color. When I was born, even though I was born in the capital of South Africa, I was not given South African citizenship. I was given citizenship of a place called Bophuthatswana. They tried to create little homelands. They tried to create little countries within South Africa. What was their ultimate move? To get rid of all the black people in South Africa and say, oh, there you are, go govern yourselves. Even though there was no international recognition of the fact that we supposedly lived in our own states. And even though the apartheid government was still ruling over us in these particular lands. My father went for a period of time where in his passport, it said state undefined. That was apartheid South Africa. Over a period of about a decade, approximately 7 million South Africans lost their citizenship. That was apartheid. Apartheid Israel. Now you see, the other side has cottoned on to the fact, or rather caught on to the fact that you can't just claim racism and you can't just claim policies that you don't like and say that there's apartheid South Africa, if you really want to be honest intellectually. And so now there's this organization, I'll mention it in a moment, that has done homework and said that there are over 50 laws, okay? Because remember, this has to be codified. So now they say that there are over 50 laws that actually discriminate Palestinian people against Israelis. This is a statement that was made by the Institute for Middle Eastern Understanding, and it's a statement that was then taken and regurgitated by Black Lives Matter in 2016. Israel is an apartheid state with over 50 laws on the books that sanction discrimination against Palestinian people. The entity that's responsible for doing all of this homework in terms of creating this list, compiling this list, is the Adala, the Legal Rights Center for Arab Minorities in Israel. But thankfully, we've got the Institute for Zionist Studies, that's actually done a compilation and categorized and said, actually, no, this is how you can explain these laws. And I've looked into several of them. The rest of them are in Hebrew. Something on my to-do list is learn Hebrew. But ladies and gents, you see the categorization of some of these laws that they so-called claim are discriminatory against Palestinians. One of them is when it looks at what the national symbols are. So because we have the national flag that has got Jewish symbolism on it, there's a law because it says this is the flag. It discriminates against Palestinian people. So then my question is, all right, what about all of these other flags across Europe that have these crosses? Crosses being Christian. So that means that the non-Christians in those countries are being discriminated against? That's being frivolous. When there's a law that says businesses in Israel, you must not deal with countries that are engaged with terror. Iran, Syria. Oh, so say the Palestinian people. Excuse me, that's wrong. So say the Palestinian leadership. Many of the Palestinian people are very ignorant of this. They truly, really just want a life for themselves. This is discrimination against the Palestinian people, because the countries are predominantly Arab, and so because Palestinians also identify themselves as Arab, this is discriminatory. Ladies and gents, you can see how without context and just using buzzwords, they manipulate in order to create a false narrative that will demonize Israel. In South Africa, when we had apartheid, across the world, you will hear motions of free South Africa, free South Africa. The intention behind those calls to free South Africa was the dismantling of a system so that all people could come together and call South Africa home, like is happening in my country at the moment, even though we are still learning, we're still growing, we still have racial tensions. But it wasn't so that there was a dismantling of a particular nation, like is what happens now. When people say free, free Palestine, Israel is an apartheid state like South Africa, we need to deal with it like South Africa was dealt with. We need to boycott, divest, and sanction. The intent behind that is not the dismantling of a system so that everybody can live in peace and harmony. It's the ending of Israel. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. There's no doubt that they say in Hamas's charter that we don't recognize Israel. Mohammed Abbas, a week ago, again articulated the fact that they will not recognize Israel. Israel should not exist. So ladies and gents, it's about dismantling Israel. This is a case study that I would appreciate your attention to. A young lady in Klebsi was actually, this was brought to her, it wasn't brought to her attention, this is one of her AP lessons, AP history. This is a lesson that she was given. Again, he's just doing the introduction. They're going to talk about independent states.
You should be able to understand how to use evidence to support a claim. So let's look at an example. First, the skills. At this point, you should be pretty comfortable with claims and evidence, right? Any argument that you make, the initial argument is a claim. You're claiming that something occurred, or evidence groups claim.
I'm just going to move it right to where he starts talking about Israel. So he's teaching them on how to.
Olga, while you're moving, I just want to point out that this is happening right now. This was brought to our attention 2 weeks ago. So this is almost live, and this is what's going on. This is, again, for those of you who not familiar, this is from the College Board. The College Board is the national organization that administers AP, and AP exams, and SAT and ACT. Public and private school kids who are great students are required to study this, to watch this, and they're being tested on this.
Thank you, Masha. So here he is looking at various newly independent states, one of which is Israel. Let's try that again.
Second century BCE, Palestine. The context from way back, we're going to go back to the 2nd century BCE, where the Jews occupied Palestine, the Hebrews at this point, right, during the Roman Empire, okay? But they were forced to leave and kicked out of this area and create all of these diasporic communities all over the world, namely Eastern Europe, Western Europe, but they're pushed from this land, okay? Now, what's so important about this land, okay? So we look at the picture here, and the picture is really focused in on this area called the Western Wall, okay? And the Western Wall are the leftover vestiges of the Temple of Jerusalem, which is a very important site to Jewish people. In the background, you see the Temple of the Dome, right? Or the Dome of the Rock. And that is an extremely important site for Muslims. It's believed there that Muhammad rode the Buraq to heaven and hell. And not in this picture, but in the same city, Jerusalem, it's believed by Christians that Jesus died and was resurrected, okay? So this piece of real estate is super important to these three religions, right? So much so that throughout history, there has been wars over this land. A big one that we covered this year was the Crusades, right? Where Christians and Muslims are fighting over the Holy Land, Jerusalem. Okay, so this land is extremely important to these three religions, right? And it's also important to note that, remember, these three religions all come from Abraham. They all are Abrahamic religions, right? They come from Judaism. Judaism leads to Christianity, and Judaism also leads to Islam. They all believe in the same God, okay? So fast forward, right? During World War I, Zionism, which is a movement to return Jews to Palestine, began to gain momentum, okay? The Balfour Declaration of 1917 directly states that the Jewish population should be given a homeland in Palestine. This is in 1917, and this declaration was given by a British diplomat, okay? Now, it doesn't occur then, but after World War II and the horrors of the Holocaust, right, which was that systematic program under Hitler to basically try to rid the world of the Jewish population, the United Nations calls for Palestine to be a homeland for the Jews. And what they do is they create two Palestines in 1948, one for Jews and one for Muslims who are already living in Palestine, okay? The establishment of Israel in 1948 is going to create anger and resentment in Palestine and all of the nearby surrounding Arab countries, okay? So what's happening is all of these areas here, right, are predominantly Arab Muslim, predominantly Sunni Arab Muslims. And a very important piece of real estate is now being taken away and given to the Jewish population, which is going to create and terrorism, okay? So two examples of these military conflicts are the Arab-Israeli War of 1948 and the Six-Day War of 1967, which both resulted in Israel taking over more territory in the region, okay? So let's look at another one. Newly independent states. Let's talk about.
All right. If you aren't looking at that with your hand over your mouth going, oh my word. Now, he says a lot of things, and thankfully this young lady, being in Clubsy, she was able to appreciate not only the fact that he was saying things out of context, the fact that he was leaving out a lot of history, the fact that he was muddling terms together, the fact that he was misrepresenting situations. She appreciated, because of Clubsy, the nuance with regards to the Middle East conflict, and so wrote back to her teacher a very detailed note as to why not only was this lesson incorrect, but that it should be removed from her teens and them having to watch it. Now, Marsha next week, or rather at the next masterclass, is actually going to see how we can put Zionism into practice. Now that you are aware that your child in school is watching this, what do? Do you just go, oh my dear, you know what, we got to keep on the fight? No, we have to do something. We need to take these things down. Why? Because how many other teens, non-Jewish teens in particular, are looking at this and they're going, wow, if this is the history lesson and this is what being taught, this is what Israel did, then of course we have to stand up, we have to shout, we have to jump and ensure that this colonialist empire is dismantled, because that's what's being taught. Now, in summary, what we can see here is very much a position of placing Israel as the oppressor against the Arabs, the Palestinians who are oppressed, and the fact that, yes, she did colonize, she did take land away. She's a secular state and so needs to be dismantled. As I close, oftentimes we're asked, what about this Palestinian people? And I want to mention the fact that, yes, there is a cause that they have. Palestinian people on the ground, many of them are suffering. Here are some highlights from 2014 of news reports that you may not have seen, but that exist, where human rights authorities or the human rights organizations in the Middle East are calling out the Palestinian Authority, but for whatever reason, it's not gaining traction here in the West. So my answer to, or my question to people that say, what about the Palestinian rights? We need to look at Israel. I say, all right, but if you really care about the Palestinian people, then you'll be doing your homework as to who is oppressing them, the reason for their, the fact that they don't have a better life. Palestinian Authority, human rights violated, Hamas war crimes against Israel. And these are articles not by Americans that are being paid, not by Jews that are being paid, but by Palestinians, by Arabs themselves. Are Palestinians not entitled to human rights? Is another title. How Palestinians terrorize their own people. Human rights violations that no one talks about. Palestinian leader delays parliamentary and presidential elections, blaming Israel. This happened just a few days ago, where Mahmoud Abbas, who was elected in 2005, for 4 years, that's what, 16 years now, after 2005. So he's been in office for 16 years over a 4-year term. In Africa, they would be calling out those leaders as dictators. Why aren't we calling out that? So what about the Palestinian people's right to elect their own leaders? Again, that right has been taken away from them. People that I encourage you to follow and that I encourage our teens to follow, if they truly want to understand and appreciate what the Palestinian people are going through, are the Al-Haq, which is a Palestinian human rights organization, Palestinian journalist and author Nadia Hashash, Khaled Abu Tuama, who is an Arab Muslim journalist, and the Palestinian Independent Commission for Human Rights. Ladies and gentlemen, it is one of the reasons why I do what I do, because if we are going to ensure that the Palestinian people also have a hope at a better life, then we need to stop pushing that the United Nations and various other forms stop using Israel as a smokescreen for actually what's going on. Hamas, as well as the PA and Fatah, they all hide behind Israel and say, Israel is the cause of all of this. And it's like, guys, let's be honest. If we really want to help the Palestinian people, then we need to absolutely understand the Middle East conflict so that they too can get a hope. So what should you do? Decide every single day, I put to you, that not on our watch. Oftentimes we can throw up our hands in despair and be like, we have been in this fight for forever and a day. And I don't discount the fact that it seems as if generation after generation, there have been these attacks, and how they will go from these military attacks to now what's happening is we've got attacks in ideology and attacks in words, but not on our watch. It's something that you and I should be saying, and something that we should be encouraging our teens. I draw inspiration and strength from the book of Isaiah 62, where it says, on your walls, O Jerusalem, I've set watchmen all day and all night, they shall never be silent. I'm also grateful for Marsha's leadership, not just Club Z, but Marsha's leadership. But when we see something, we're told, say something, do something. On our watch, we will not keep silent, so that in our generation, hopefully there may be peace. We read that the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. That's something that Abraham Lincoln said. And so that's why it's important that our teens know the truth of what is happening in their schools, because that philosophy, that ideology is going to impact how they see Israel one day when they become leaders. And it's with that that I end this, to say that as we continue to learn, as you continue to learn, as we continue to teach our teens the truth, ladies and gents, not the bias, not saying that we want this because it's our story. No, we want it because it's the truth, that no lie indeed shall prosper. Marsha, over to you, and I'll be happy to answer a few questions.
Whew. Thank you, Olga. This was a marathon of information. Thank you. I do want to open to questions, but I want to also pose a question to you guys. Is, forget your students, right? What would you say to somebody who comes to you with this thing, right? Like, Jews occupied Palestine during the Roman Empire, right? Zionism is a movement to return Jews to Palestine. Jewish population should be given a homeland in Palestine. And see, the pernicious thing about this is that, well, yes, there is always, with any kind of propaganda and indoctrination, there is always going to be a kernel of truth, right? Because on technicality, yeah, Zionism was a movement to return Jews to Palestine because that was the name of the place. It's a geographic place, not a country. So while we're waiting for questions, would you guys like to see what the student actually wrote to the teacher? Hold on, let me see. I'm not going to go through the whole letter. I'll just, I'll do this briefly. Do you see it? I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, okay. So she wrote a nice thing like, blah, 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 below are the statements and flaws in the presentation. Now, I have to tell you, yes, we helped the student write, but she wrote it, and we just helped a little bit of wordsmithing and a little bit of sort of like putting beginning and the end, right? But this was from her. She's a 10th grader, a very, very quiet girl. And this is her second year in Club Z. And you can imagine I'm very proud of what she wrote, right? Like, let's go through just through the first thing, right? Jews occupied Palestine during the empire. Well, there was no Palestine during the Roman Empire. In fact, Jews lived in what was called Judea, which was colonized by the Romans and renamed Palestine. Jews did not occupy the land. The Romans ethnically cleansed, killed, and enslaved the Jews of Judea and then exiled them from their homeland. Romans conquered Judea, and they created the name Palestina to mock the Jews by changing the name of their land after their old enemy, the Philistines. This phrase portrays Jews as colonizers, when in fact, what was known as Palestine since 135 CE is the ancestral homeland of the Jews.
I mean, that phrase doesn't even make sense at all. Like, Roman Empire was the greatest empire there. How can you occupy Roman land?
Listen, I looked up the teacher, right? So this is going to be my practical Zionism class in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever. But one of the things that I do always is I look up the person who is writing these things or assigning these things. I want to know who I'm talking to, right? She's a nice young American teacher who is, you know, just this is the resource that I assigned. That's why I don't really have much interest of going after the teacher, but I do have plans to go after the College Board because they are endorsing it, and that is spreading that is spreading anti-Semitism to our youngsters.
Masha,
yeah.
did you get? Is it good to get a consultation? Is this presentation on the level of the SAT board? Is this covered by Title VI, or is this not a college organization, so it wouldn't be?
It's not a right. It's not college. It's high school. So Julie, do you wanna ask a question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what happens is a lot of the teachers get lazy, and they like to use these resources that are provided by the College Board. And that's why it's really important to take down this kind of presentation, because they just send it out to the kids and blast it for them to prepare for these AP courses. I mean, I'm guessing there's APUSH for the juniors, there's AP Gov usually for the seniors. I'm wondering which this particular AP Prep was for. And I think that what you're doing is exactly right. It's less the school, but more the College Board that is a monopoly, and we're all supporting, with these APs and the SATs and ACTs. So it's super important to clean it up.
Yeah. Yeah. So please watch out for the campaign that we are putting together, because this should not be tolerated. This is intolerable. And once we have something together, we're working together with another organization. I wanna make it go big. All right. We did get a question ahead of time. So Olga, you ready?
Sure.
So here's the question. How do you respond that Israel's creation in 1948 displaced Arabs who should now be able to return to their homeland?
So that's a very complicated question. I'll be the first one to admit. And I say complicated because of the nuances that exist, not only in relation to what happened in 1948, even though there's factual support for what I'm about to say, factual evidence, but also what has transpired since. So in 1948, it is true that there were Arabs that were living in the land, and that there were Arabs who left the land. The question then needs to be asked, why did they leave the land? In Syrian Prime Minister, a former Syrian Prime Minister's memoir, I believe it was Prime Minister Omar, he noted the fact that the Arab leaders were so confident in their ability that they would win this war that they said, get out, get out, get out. We don't want you to be victims of war, get out. As soon as we beat the Zionist aspirations, whatever they want to do, you guys can come back. And so people did. They packed up their bags and they left. And some people left of their own volition. They said, we're scared. We see that there's war. Just as, God forbid, if we heard that there was going to be war today or the tomorrow in Charlotte, I'd be like, I love my Charlotte family, but we can get out of here. So now that people then left their homes and we saw the establishment of the State of Israel, who comes back? We may be familiar with the fact that UNRWA has defined Palestinian refugees very specifically and very specially. It's a different definition to refugees across the world. So it does not only encompass people that left the land at that point in time, but their descendants pretty much perpetually. So the question then says, or is rather, do all 5.7 million supposed Palestinians, do they then have the right to return to Israel automatically, even though there were 700,000 that were displaced at the time? That's one of the questions. The other question is, who still can be regarded as a refugee? For everybody else in the world, as soon as you then find a place that's your home, you then aren't considered to be a refugee. So the first thing that often do is I show an understanding to say, yes, there were people that were displaced. But then I also want to point a finger and say, all right, that's why we need better leadership for the Palestinian people to say, instead of having leaders that are actually very vocal in the fact that we want to go back, but we don't want to go back because we had a home. We want to go back because we no longer want the existence of a Jewish state. Yeah, Marsha, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that. I think it's unfortunate there's wars that happens. We recognize the fact that people lost their homes. I actually, if I was prime minister, potentially, would be like, okay, those people that can prove that they were, that they had a home at that time, you can go back. And there's a process, which I understand in Israel, in order to become a citizen for anybody. Follow that process, but not all 5.7 million that according to UNRWA should be going back.
Right. So, and I also think it's good to have, so when you have somebody who's genuinely interested and genuinely wants to know, you should be having these nuanced conversation. When you want to be a little bit more clever, facetious, confrontational, if you will, I have said, okay, tell me, who are you talking about? Do you have a specific, right? Because one of the things that anti-Israel activists do, they walk around with the keys, right? This is the key to my house, you know. And every time I go to Jaffa, I could buy those keys because they're literally in every little shop. You can go buy the rusty keys, right? So here's the thing. Here's the conversation. Was somebody kicked out of their home? That is a horrible injustice during the war. Let's see. Do they have a deed to the house? Did they leave on their own volition? What? Let's trace it. And if you were, kicked out of your house by the Jews and your house was taken over, then you have two options. Do you want compensation, or do you actually want to come back? And if you want to come back, show me the proof. Basically, I always gonna put it back on the people. And 90% of people that are saying that, they either left by themselves because they left. Practically their tea kettles were still on the stove because they were assured by their Arab leadership that in 3 days we're gonna wipe the Jews out and you're gonna come back. So another great answer, actually from Alan Dershowitz. Right? The lawyer? Yes. So look up his answer. It's called, if you look up Alan Dershowitz, It's Time to Move On, Palestinians. Great answer, right? And his answer was, stop looking in the past. Look ahead, right? Now you're living here. Like we have, I'll never stop talking about her, right? We have an Arab woman who claims to be Palestinian, who was born and raised in one of the most exclusive Bay Area towns, and she's considered Palestinian refugee, right? Will she ever want to go live in whatever village her family came from? Give me a break, right?
On that point, Marsha, there's a lot of people who, when they say that, they have got no desire, no interest in seeing Palestinian people move back home. They really are just about, oh, Israel has done this, Israel has done this. So half the time it's just, let's take a paintbrush and wipe everybody broadly.
Right.
Do we ever, can I just ask guys, whenever I have that question on top of everything that you said, I always ask the question, well, what about the tea kettles in Gaza? How many, that were pulled out in 2008, or how many Judea and Samaria Jews are going to be part of the new Palestinian state? So I think there's a line of argument developed that you can't argue that the Palestinians belong in Israel, but Palestine has to be, whatever the new state is going to be, has to be Jude free.
Right.
Right. Like that's just not a logical thing to do. And I say that to people too.
Right. And
also,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I just to step back, and I don't know whether this line of thinking is fruitful or not, but I keep on asking myself, how many other countries have been sanctioned by a union of many other countries to exist? And how many other countries actually bought most of the land they moved to? And this is the land that there is historical proof of their existence there for longer than Western civilization existed. So you could lay all the claims that they put in front to Israelis to practically every country on earth. So why not turn it back? Like you could pick a country. Like you don't like French wine, pick France, and you can go on in alphabetical order. Am I like I said, I don't know if it's fruitful to think like that, but
listen, I think it helps to know world history, right? And so to point out that Pakistan was also established. That's a brand new country that was established in 1948, in the same year as Israel, with huge exchanges of population. Millions of people were displaced. Somehow nobody talks about that, right? World War II, how many millions of people were displaced? When Jews went back to Poland to claim their property, what happened? There were pogroms in Poland in 1946, 47, and 48, right? So it does help to know history. Okay.
I'm seeing the chat. So to Marcy's point, there's actually, for everybody, if you can read it, she's talking about the thousands of Jewish refugees. So there was 800,000 Jewish refugees that were also created around the same time. There's a great Prager University video by my father-in-law actually addressing this particular issue. Today, the world does not see any Jew as a refugee in terms of the definition of refugee status. So all of these people that fled, no, the Jews aren't refugees, but the Palestinians have been growing in number. It just goes to show the hypocrisy of it. Masha, I also saw that there's a question from Michael.
Yes, Michael asked, how do you compare, so I just want to be mindful of the time. We have like 3 minutes left. How do you compare West Bank Gaza to Bantustans? So compare that. So just to take everybody back to my presentation, it's where I showed the map of South Africa and then I showed the dotted, the different colors. So if we look at history, we'll know the fact that there's the Oslo Accords. So we had the 1967 war, and Israel then gains this land that was illegally occupied by Jordan. People don't want to talk about that. It's not as if the Palestinian people had it by themselves. So it was occupied by Jordan. We then have this war. Israel then gains this land as part of the war, but then it's considered disputed territory. And so now it's like, what are we going to do with this? And so there are conversations, debates, offers of land that are rejected. In 1993, the early 90s, we have the coming together of Israeli as well as Palestinian leadership, and they come and they agree on these terms of how they are going to govern this piece of land in the journey towards accomplishing peace, in the journey potentially of a future Palestinian state. So we have these Oslo Accords, and these accords, they were supplemented later, divide the West Bank into areas A, B, and C. And in A, B, and C, you've got in area A, Palestinian administration as well as Palestinian security, responsible for everything. And then area B, it's shared between Israel as well as Palestinian Authority. Israel takes care of the security, and area C is all of Israeli. And it's military law, not even proper Israeli civil law. And so when you look at, first of all, the reason for the distinctions between these areas, very different to what happened in South Africa. And so Bantustans. Bantustans, like I said, was based not just on the color of your skin, but on your tribe. We are going to literally displace Black South Africans per their tribes and put them into these places where you are supposed to live. So we can actually take away your citizenship of South Africa and give you a new citizenship of a new state that you didn't agree to as Black South Africans, but then also that has got no international recognition. The Oslo Accords was an agreement between these two authorities in relation to people living in disputed territories, and it also has international recognition. So that is how I would answer that, Michael. I hope that was succinct enough. I'm also being cognizant of the time.
Thank you. Yeah, if you guys know Mordechai Kedar, he has the 8-state solution, the kind of quote unquote Palestinian Emirates plan. And I hear a lot of people saying that it's like a Bantustan versus an Emirates or an Emirati type of plan. So that's what I was wondering, how do we respond to that?
Yes,
thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So let's, as they say, we always want to leave people wanting more. So I want to first and foremost to thank Olga for being the incredible you, for doing this really great presentation. And I think what we learned is that now we just need to have a separate talk with Olga about apartheid as a guest speaker, and open it to a big event. I also would like to thank everybody for coming, and if I may make a few announcements. Announcement number one is that the next and final in this series masterclass is going to be on May 24th, which is a Monday. And this is where I'm going to talk about practical Zionism, meaning what can we do as parents, as community members, as neighbors, as employees, what tools do you have? That's our next class. We do have a very special treat for our community. We are going to be hosting Ruth Weiss on June 6th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And she's going to be talking about Jews and power. She wrote an incredible book, which I highly, highly recommend everybody read. And so this is going to be in conversation with Ruth Weiss. If you guys don't know who she is an incredible Jewess, if you will, of our time. And the most important announcement and reminder is that I want to make sure we are in the recruitment season, and we have to, my goal is to really grow. My goal is to really become the source and the resource for every Jewish teen and for every Jewish family when it comes to Arab-Israeli conflict, Israel, and how to deal with issues when they come up. We can only grow if you can help us. Most of our recruiting is done by word of mouth. So please, please, please let your friends know. Ask your kids to bring friends. In every location, we'll be hosting parlor meetings. We'll be hosting ice cream socials for the teens. We'll be doing parents' night outs. So watch out for that. And just, again, reach out to your regional director and give them some names of the friends that you think would benefit from this. Anything else? No, that's it. All right. Again, thank you very much. I'm sorry we're in just a few minutes late. Not too bad. And stay in touch. And we will post this probably on our YouTube channel, so everybody could get a link. All right. Thank you.
Masha, can I ask you a question, even
Sure.
as people are leaving?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to detain people, but I have like a question / suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you want to get kind of involved with this organization, but are you following what's going on at Project Veritas?
A little bit.
Okay, so he's like bringing all these lawsuits to expose media
Mm-hmm.
that defame and lie.
Right.
And I took a screenshot of this video that he just posted, and he just started something called Project Veritas Legal, defending the defamed. If you have been lied about, contact us. And I don't think that it's like if you as an individual have been lied about,